Okay. Helps one if I turn my microphone on. Of course, that was just my luck. My streaming program decided it was going to crash on me, so I'm just getting things reset up. And I'm just going to plunk straight into the chat the link to this matrix I've got going on, if you'd like to download that. For anybody watching this later on later on after the fact, it will be available on zavenart.ca/lessons and resources. And we are doing the building blocks today. Building blocks and drawing shapes, and they are two different kinds of things that go on there. Oh man, my computer is being super slow today. Oh no, you're having troubles here. Let me hope it's not on my end, Shell. Oh, you're calling yourself trouble. Okay. Well, welcome to Shapes and Shading, first out of 3 lessons for this bad boy. So I generally, in my mind, I kind of separate shapes into 2 different categories. The shapes you use to draw with and the building block shapes. And building block shapes are kind of the ones that you typically think about where if you draw a circle and try to think of it in 3D, this is going to be your sphere. We'll take a square and a square. We're going to make a cube. I'm not being particularly neat because this is our practice run. So we've all kind of had that basic learn how to draw a cube at some point, or most of us have, or you experiment with 3D lettering and all that fun stuff. It's kind of what we're going to do here by taking these shapes that we've got on the side and the top. And then we've got triangle, triangle, we'll make a pyramid. And I should actually, let's do that way so we can kind of see my full screen. See, I need to tilt that back a little bit more. For some people, it's easier to draw your base down first, so we can do that. I'm just kind of putting a little bit of a dotted line in the background. Then just to kind of make life easier, I guess with the sphere we'll do you imagine the back half is around. And I'm just going to throw that link back in the chat because I know it sometimes likes to clear it out. It's also on the website, so you can download all the files that I'm using. Okay, so we've got our basic building block shapes. These three generally are what you'd use to make pretty much everything else. But if you look at the shapes we originally used, so if we have something we look at and we go, oh, that's a sphere, we can draw a circle really easy. If we look at something and we see a cube, we can start by throwing it a square. Did I alt tab out of it? Was that the problem? That was the problem. So now we're going to start going into a little bit of the more strange places. Well, what happens when we add a sphere and a square? Well, we're going to get this nice can-like shape going. Put your cylinder whichever direction you'd like. You'd also start making, say, a cup out of a cylinder. Circle and a triangle. Well, let's do a cone. This could be your basis of a witch's hat. And we're just moving kind of quick. We're not trying to make everything look perfect or neat. And just to give everyone a heart attack, later on we're going to be running on a timer, so this is going to be entertaining for me. Okay, so we've already done a cylinder, so what else can we think of that you can use a circle and a square with? Well, let's say the square is the cutout instead. So now we have the really quick, simple cutout orange. Nothing like drawing out of pressure. You are right about that, lady. What about our triangle and our cube? Well, we could go with a square pyramid, or we can do, let's do a tent. And again, if it helps, experiment with different ways if it helps you to put down your bottom shape first, and then extend things up. I'm actually drawing a complete blank on what else we could do for triangle and a circle. Well, let's do triangle and multiple circles then. we'll draw a smaller circle on the inside. You can make it come down to a point if you'd like, and then you can cut it off. We have a very cartoony flashlight going. And then we've got one more square and triangle. Stand this guy up on his. So there we've got our couple basic shapes. Ooh, perfect. Yay for drawing along. So whenever you look at an object kind of around your desk or around town, park bench, street lights, look and see what kind of shapes you can break it down into. Your simplest bare bones shape, your circle, your square, your triangle. And chances are you'll be able to break down everything into one of these three variations. A diamond is also another option. We could even do that here. Put another triangle on top, but it's got a square base in the middle. So these are our basic everything breaks down generally into some simpler shape. These are 3D building block shapes to give things an optical illusion, make people think that they're a 3D object on a 2D plane. By contrast, drawing shapes are what we use to give the most amount of information with the simplest form. So to you, your drawing shapes might be different than what mine are going to be. And I just opened up a new canvas here. And drawing shapes can be squiggles. I should have done something else for squiggles. We'll go like this. Squiggles. So if I tend to start drawing curly or wild hair, I tend to go with my squiggle shapes to kind of get an idea of the body. We've got zigzags. You can use that for um, zippers, just to kind of tell you, hey, this is a zipper. Or you can use it for curvature lines, is what I typically will use zigzags for. You have your J shapes. So this is the one you'll see a lot for faces. You can have a sharp J. You can have an easy J. Bubble shapes are what you'll see people use for figure drawing a lot. And again, the goal is to try to get as much information down, simplest form, and try to be as quick as humanly possible. For this one, we're going to say the messier the better. And then we've got cyclones. And people tend to use this a lot for curvature too, to be able to see how an object is curving. I did mine, obviously not very consistent. I've also used cyclones are generally my warm-up. This is how I get my arm loose to go. And my little cyclone flowers give me a little bit of directional practice, keeping things consistent, keeping a consistent pressure no matter which direction I'm drawing in. So you've been using these the entire time, likely without realizing it, as you're doing your own drawings, or even as we were doing the little exercise right before it. When we did our cylinder, we did bubble, lines. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, lines is one of your other basic ones. Sometimes it's just quick. So you can look at that, and even though it's a lot messier than our building block one, you can look at that and go, hey, that's a cylinder. You know what's going on. And I'm just going to grab the other download file, the 1.2 can shape file. Oh boy. And of course my headphones are now saying, hey, you're dying. Give me 1 second to plug these things in. So I figure out what I did with my cable. So that link is in there if you guys want to download what I'm using as a reference image. No, I am not sponsored by Monster, although with how much I drink, I probably should be. And we're going to kind of start looking at we're gonna look at the can and oh, I don't have my reference image over there, which I really should. Bring all of those over there. Oh, and then I lost my tablet. There it is. So not the best picture, but it will do us for now. Feel free to use your own references if you feel like it. And use as many pieces of paper as you want. You don't have to do this tiny in the middle. Lean back, get a good motion going on your arm, on your shoulder. These are great warm-ups. So just looking at it, I immediately see, okay, I have my circle that I need. And we've got kind of a little bit of a J shape going. Some straight lines. And if it helps you, you can draw what's going on in the back. Shall you always choose hard references? Yes. But hey, challenge is the best. You never want to get bored. And because I'm looking at it just a little bit as I'm going, I've got a little bit of a tilt down to it. So how I know 3D, objects are made is this should be as parallel as possible or as similar as possible because I don't have much perspective going on in this picture. It is fairly straight on. Right now, we're trying to tell our brain to stop thinking about what it knows and we're just drawing what we see. So our brain is going to try to tell us, hey, I assume that things are this way because this is how I know 3D objects to be in my case. I'm telling it to shut up. Those are, a lot of the times, your brain can be wrong. We're going to think like artists on this one. I can see I've got some curves there. I've got another curve kind of coming around here. See my can tab, so I'm going to use a bubble. I'm gonna use another bubble. This one's kind of like a triangle bubble. And we can also use our shapes to do shadows, even. So we're going to go more into directional lighting in the third class and a little bit more into shading, but I can look at the shadow and I can actually figure out which way my shadow is coming from, or my light is coming from based on that. I'm going to use my zigzag just to kind of show where I'm putting shadow. And then I'm actually going to use my back and forth zigzags to kind of show the curvature of my object. Just to kind of break it down, tell myself, hey, if I go into shading this object is quite noticeably curved. And you can use this on limbs, you can use this on pretty much everything. And then because I'm looking at it and my lines look a little bit narrower, so I'm just going to draw them narrower at the bottom. And as you're going, use lighter strokes and then start progressing into darker is generally the best way to go about it. And the best way to tell your brain to stop thinking, to turn off and stop for a moment, is to set yourself a time limit. So that didn't take us very long at all to get something like that. Drawing shapes are also the basis of gesture drawing, which that's a term used to refer to a kind of figure drawing where you're just getting things down as quickly as possible and you're just recording movement. So if we were doing a person pose, we'll do almost like a reverse Captain Morgan thing. And I can link quite a few really good gesture drawing sites where they throw figures, either clothed, nudes, and you can start working on your gestures, and it's got timers on them, which is great. Another good thing to do is look at other artists on Twitch, on YouTube, and see what they start breaking things down into. I know lots of people who've watched my stream know that when I do a head shape, I do this hard J with a couple lines, and a circle for the ear. And I tend to do bubbles for clavicles and hard bones. Just look at a couple artists, see if you can pick out what shapes they're using. And we all use kind of the same basics, but what works for everyone is going to be slightly different than somebody else's. I'm just putting kind of a fake shadow in there. Writing some scribbles down just to show that it's not quite on counter. I keep looking over and I see my welcome to chat room thing open up, so I'm like, oh no, hopefully my internet is still going properly. It says it is. And then if you've noticed, as I've been talking, every time I pause, I just kind of... Oh, I'm going to have to open a new window. Yeah. Every time I take a pause, I take a look, and then I start throwing in more shapes. There's always details that you can throw in just using simplest bare bones. Well, hello, Tiger. And then the nice thing about digital is I can grab and move things, but if you guys have to, feel free to start another paper. That's what a lot of artists end up doing is we have 6,000,001 random scraps of paper. Um, the amount of printer paper I have stuffed into my sketchbooks is absolutely hilarious. I think I have more printer paper stuffed into my sketchbooks than I do actual sketch paper. So it's not perfect, but I've been breaking down the shapes. I can look at this drawing and go, that is definitely a can. And I am way ahead of schedule because look at me go. We can go back to our shapes matrix and 1 second, Tiger, and let me link you. All of the oh, that's definitely not the right thing. There you go. So the second one is the shape matrix that we got going on here. We kind of did circle plus circle and square plus circle, and then we kind of started trying to get a little bit creative with the shapes when you run out of it. So we ended up with a weird kind of flashlight thing. But we can take our drawing shapes and we can start figuring out some more stuff. Say this is, ooh, Photoshop's doing its thing, I see. Let's say this is a fruit. I don't have a reference image. Normally I would say pull up a reference image. I can throw in some scribble triangle shapes. And throw in some line drawing shapes to kind of show that it's on a surface. We can go to our little tent. We can add flaps using more lines. Just kind of squiggle blacken that inside out so we know just from looking at it, oh hey, that looks like a tent. Hello, Paranoid Pop Rocks. Ignore me while my throat is getting a little bit sore. We went over the difference between building shapes, which are the 3D shapes that you generally think about, and drawing shapes, which is your squiggles, your zigzags to show curvature, J shapes, bubbles, and drawing shapes generally are to get information down as quickly as possible. And the video will be up on the website so you guys can all see that. And then we made a can out of a reference image because I drink a lot of energy drinks, so it can happen to be the first thing on my desk that I had looked at. Like, you can draw a mug, you can draw whichever you would like. We're just looking at things and telling our brains, I don't care what you're assuming the shapes are, we're going to break down the shapes. And these shapes are, again, going to be different for everyone else because this is all about what makes things easier for you to read. Doesn't matter who else is looking at it, doesn't matter if it's another artist, doesn't matter if it's a teacher going, oh no, you have to do something this way. Try it out. If it doesn't work for you, try something else. I cannot, for the life of me, do that cyclone thing to show the form of a leg because my brain sees those backlines and I just can't interpret it very well at all. Uh, just looking around at what else I've got on my desk, I have a mug that's you normally wouldn't think to use circles for a mug. It's one of those very flared, very shapely. So use a circle if you want to. Tell your brain, no, don't care that you think you see something that way. I'm going to see it this way. Because that's our brains lie. Our brains lie so much. So I'm looking at it kind of from the bottom. That's why it looks a little bit strange. Then if I kind of wanted to show the curve. Brains do suck, Shell. You can use some lines and some zigzags. I'm apparently drawing this all on my background layer, but that's fine. Although if that's the case, I should make this into my background color, so that way when I erase it, it erases it. Like your guys's would erase. So, and this one's going to take me a couple seconds to look up because I did not pull up a reference beforehand. Let's go with Mr. Brett Booth. So now that we kind of got our mind on looking at things and simplifying them, let's take the kings and queens of simplification. Let's pull up. We'll pull up some Cardcaptor Sakura and some comic stuff. Cardcaptor is kind of my go-to. Once my Google loads. Because I believe Cardcaptor Sakura is now old enough to not have copyright issues. If not, I will have to blur this out, I guess. Do. Come on, computer. And you can bring up your favorite comic book or cartoon characters. Open image in a new tab. There we go. Okay, so once it loads, I'm just using, this is going to be kind of blurry. That was a small image, I should have used a different one. Oh well. We're going to kind of take a quick look and see if we can guess how these artists are simplifying their stuff. Normally I don't have this problem because I'm normally working all on two windows, but I'm gonna keep these here for you guys. So even just looking at character facial features, in anime they don't even typically do the nose. They make a shape out of the shadow of the nose. We can see J shapes, we can see other J shapes. As you can tell, I haven't drawn anime in a very long time. But right now, we're just kind of looking at what shapes they might have been using. We can look at the shape of Sakura's torso. That would generally be, oh hey, let's use a bubble. Poofs on her shirt definitely look like bubbles. We can use line shapes to kind of figure out where our motion is. We use another circle shape to get the hat going. We're doing this just kind of as a gesture, so we want to move as quick as possible. And if you're getting into characters and character drawing, the best thing to do is to start figuring out what bubbles you're going to use from real life forms and then start simplifying them down. Because you'll find the shapes that I'm using here are actually quite the same. So you can bubble for shoulder, you can use bubbles for necks, you can use bubbles for pretty much everything. You can use lines, you can use your J shapes, you can use your zigzags just to kind of indicate, hey, there's, ooh, come on, spinning pinwheel of doom. You can use zigzags just to kind of indicate that there's stuff going on in the clothing. And the goal of this one is to not make it look exactly like what we're drawing, but to kind of start laying out our own groundwork. So it would be easier to build off of this than to try to get an exact eye shape going, and then when you move on to the next one, you go, oh, the rest of the face doesn't work. So start with your shapes and your gestures, and then slowly but surely, like we kind of did with the can there, slowly but surely add more detail and start refining things. So here we can see Brett Booth, one of my personal favorites for comic book artists. We can see he's got kind of bubbles going all over the place for muscles. He's got some really sharp curves going upwards for Batman's ribs. We can use a triangle to kind of show that dip. And when you're doing exercises like these, work with your biggest shape first and then start working your way smaller. You're going to do what I just did and it's going to look very, very funny. You'll end up... I'm not calling you out, Shell. It's... Everyone does it. I've done it. I'd bet you Brett Booth has done it. So you'll see a lot of artists, they'll work with a full torso first, and then they'll start a bubble for a torso. Then they'll start working down. And I'm just kind of, instead of figuring out all the muscles, I'm just going through and adding one bubble for each section of the arm because I'm working from biggest to smallest. And because I know there's thigh hiding back there, and I can zigzag under here just to kind of show, hey, once I get below the kneecap, a lot of it's going to be facing downwards, is what that zigzag means to me. And then we've got some foreshortening here, which we'll go over a little bit tomorrow with, or not tomorrow, next Friday. I do this every single... every single artist ever has worked on fine detailing facial features and then started drawing out the face and going, hey, that's not in the right spot. Sorry, Pop Rocks, that's, yeah, that one's, every artist does it. Um, which is where the timer helps. So if we put ourselves on a 30-second timer to get this entire idea down, work from your big things, work your way in. And you'll notice once your timer goes off that you should have something you can at least look at and go, okay, I kind of see the idea of what's going on in this image. So if I were to step back or come back after a couple minutes and look at this, I'd be able to go, okay, I can see his hands kind of here. We're looking at his chest kind of from a little bit of a harder down to up angle. His knee's in front here, his other leg is going back. And when I say time limit, I mean 10-second, 20-second, 30-second. Proper locations, yeah. Yeah, every artist does that with that. You put things in just the wrong place, which is where kind of getting these shapes, they don't have to be perfect. They just have to give you an idea. So try doing it under the 10-second, 20-second, 30-second timer. I am not the best person on the face of the planet to teach gesture drawing because I understand why I need it. Doesn't necessarily mean I like it. And figure drawing, I prefer to do my figure drawing as my fan art characters, my favorite characters. I turn them into characters I enjoy, so that way I can stay interested long enough to do them. And everyone's got a different way of learning things and of doing things. So if you're finding bubbles aren't working, you can try just doing, I'm going to redo this, but smaller. This doing it smaller is what's called thumbnailing. So some people can use zigzag lines a little bit better, and some people can actually read this if you can. You can read that. All the power to you. I'm likely the only person who can read it. But if using straighter lines or more curvy lines as opposed to bubbles works better for you, that's all okay. Man, I'm way ahead of schedule. That's okay. Mm-mm-mm. And for when I'm looking at these ones, and again, I'm not like the greatest at anime anymore, because it's been a really long time. These are just the shapes that I see. So if you prefer to see a square, try drawing with squares. If you prefer to see triangles, try drawing with triangles. And I'm going to grab the other one. And I'm going to say uh, for the homework for tonight, I'm going to say use objects, don't use faces, and I'll probably reiterate that because we're looking at more simple shapes. The shapes that you can look at something and go, this is obviously this shape, and I can tell by looking at it. Because faces are hard, man. Faces and bodies. Go away. So I just dropped a link in there for a lamp. And give me a couple seconds to close these down. And watch my pinwheel go. You're still working on cups, lady? Yeah, hey. The things you use for cups are the exact same things you use for arms. So don't even worry about that. Cups is a great starting point. And for shell feet and hands, you can draw a tent. You could probably draw feet and hands. It's just getting your brain to stop thinking of them as feet and hands is the hard part. I know I'm bringing that back, so okay, so that other image I threw in there for you guys is one of my weird, strange looking lamps. And I'm gonna set down a timer. And hope my iPad is loud enough that you can hear it over the microphone. So I'm gonna set her for, we'll say 20 seconds. And I'm gonna work from biggest to smallest so I can kind of see where my shapes are. I can see that one's at an angle. I'm not looking for perfect right now. 20 seconds. I have a basic idea. I keep forgetting how short 20 seconds is. I'm gonna set it for another one. We're gonna refine it a little bit more. and I can look and see, okay, these are actually a little bit straighter than I was seeing them the first time around. Second timer went off, starting to make a little bit more sense. And you could just keep going with your timer however much you want. Most people would do a completely new paper each and every time, and you are more than welcome to do that. And I'm not sure if you guys can pick it up, but my timer just kind of keeps constantly going off, and that's just reminding me to move right now. But you can have yours set for, hey, this is done, putting it down, going somewhere else now. I want to tell myself that that is moving in that direction. Okay, so I'm going to stop those ones. That wasn't very long, just for have base it. They're not 100% perfect, but I can kind of see what's going on. I can make out it's kind of what I need to tweak a little bit, because it looks like these shapes are very similar. If you find 20 seconds is too short, although you should be doing a couple 20 seconds just kind of as challenge. Try a 45 second, see what you can get done in 45 seconds on a new piece of paper, and you'll find that every single time that you did it, that you've drawn the same thing, your brain is remembering how it's drawing it, and it's drawing it quicker and quicker each and every time, which is a very, very good skill to learn to get a handle on. So you're telling your brain to turn off, telling muscle memory to turn on. And because I can't have my notes and my timer open at the same time, oh right, I'm working straight on canvas, I'm not working on layer. If I kind of wanted to give myself an idea of what's going on down here, I can draw my wall lines as a kind of reference point. Then do we have any questions so far? And since we've hit our hour mark, I'm going to say stand up, go get some water, take a wander around, none from you. And if there's questions when I get back in 5-10 minutes, we will go through them, and then we are going to go on to shading principles. And we'll kind of, I'm doing digital art, but I'll brush up on pencils, charcoal, pastels, paints, and kind of how you can, what the wording is for digital and what they mean in traditional art. So I will be right back. Take a 10-minute walk around, rest your eyes. Okay, and I am back. I've been arguing. Oh, right. I've been arguing with my head most of today. And we are going to go on to shading principles. Let me turn on my settings so you can kind of see what I've got going on. I'm actually going to move over to this brush, which is a hard edge chalk brush. So pen pressure and control is the basis for most of shading, good shading, or gradation. And gradation is how smooth you transition from dark to light. Um, and most people who've been to any of my streams or my classes see that I work on a gray background. This is to make it easier for me to be able to see dark shapes on dark shapes if I had a white background. Actually, I can kind of show you what I mean. When you're working on a computer screen, it's giving off light. So if I go dark and then I just go slightly less dark, I can't see the difference in that. And actually, I should have done that on separate. Let's do that on a separate layer so I can kind of show you what's going on. So if I got really dark, and then I put slightly less dark on there, you can't see the difference. But if I make my background black, you can kind of start seeing that darkness shows up. But if I have a black background and I have pure white, then I start going a little bit lighter, you can kind of see that, but it's not as obvious as if I was, oh, drat, I did that on background layer again. The good old wrong layer. Yeah, so that one's kind of hard to see the background, but if I made this white, you can see that white smudge. And that's because I'm working on, with computer screen, you're working with light. You tick off the wrong layer on bingo. Yeah, on Tiger's mentioning on my live streams, we kind of end up going with a bingo. Every digital artist goes, because we all know that feeling. So I generally work with a pretty even or close to even gray background when I'm working digital, because this is hard to see, but not as hard as if I were working on white. And same thing with this. It's kind of hard to see, but it's not as bad as if I were working on black. You're going to notice that you don't get that near as bad on traditional because you're working with what's called ambient lighting. So the paper is actually reflecting the light and your brain is saying, hey, this is white, but it's not actually pure white. Although I will never, if you find it's easier to work on paper that is gray or a neutral brown, go for it. It is definitely a neat little experience working on neutral paper. So in order to make good gradation, your good smooth from dark to light, there are a couple tricks in every medium to make things easier. And for digital art, I typically use my flow slider, but you can use an opacity slider. And for anyone who came to the digital art class, your flow is how thick your paint comes in each time Photoshop makes a stamp. So if you see I move my spacing, you see the stamps spread out. But when you move them very close together at, say, 1%, it looks as if it's perfectly smooth. It's not actually, it's putting a million little dabs of paint, essentially. So when I move my flow down, it's not adding as much paint per stamp, or it's starting to fade out per stamp. Depending on, I have this one set to my pen pressure. And opacity is kind of the same way, except it goes based on how many times you pick up and put down your brush. So as soon as I release this, I can then go in with another layer, and I can keep going in and layering up, and it will only ever put up to a maximum of 12% paint, we'll call it. For me, typically, I go 20, 24, 21, around there, depending on which my brush is. For a softer brush, um, I go even lower in flow because I typically like to see my brush strokes. So if we were talking about pencils instead of digital art, um, we're talking more in terms of pencil hardness and softness. So you have a 6B, which is your softest, and we're going to say a 6B would equivalent to, say, a flow of 95. So that goes in really dark, no matter, even if you're putting in light pressure. And that's because it's soft, which means it's putting the most graphite down per stroke. When you move down to an HB, we're going to say that's probably your midpoint. So we'll say 46. And 46, you can make it darker, but you're going to have to start adding more pressure. And you can make it lighter, but it's only going to go to a certain amount. And then you get down to your H's for pencil, which those are hard, so they're not leaving down near as much graphite. So we can say it's actually that. So they would be more like this, except they're going to probably be a sharper point. So when we're talking about pencils, we can translate that to the flow in digital art. And charcoal, pastels, and paints, they all kind of work in a very similar fashion. Paint uses the addition of water or oil to disperse the pigment, which is laying down less pigment. So you can use that to make a lighter shade, and then you'd add more pigment to get your darker shade. I should just make a new layer. There we go. I'm working with digital for a reason. One other good thing I will point out is listen to your body. If your hand is starting to hurt like nothing else, adjust your settings. Increase your flow. If you're sitting here at this and you're trying to make everything go black as possible, your hand's going to kill you. Your wrist is going to hate you, and carpal tunnel and arthritis are soon in your future after several years. So adjust your settings. If you're doing the same thing with pencil and your HB, you have to work a lot just to get all of that dark space. Jump to a 6B or try a 2B. Start going up. Start adding more pigment to your paint. Go with a darker charcoal. So shading gradation, I'm using generally I use my flow and color picker in Photoshop, but you can, with pencil, you're going to be learning a little bit more body control, where you start getting lighter and lighter. I typically start selecting my shades as I go. From the digital art class, that's for me holding my Alt key to be able to select my in-between colors. And there are ways to simplify this with every medium, but eventually you will have to learn how to kind of do it by hand without a smudge stick and without Uh, in Photoshop, it's a smudge tool or a soft brush. You can use soft brush to make your life a little bit easier. And I should actually be making my brush a lot bigger because this is what I was talking about listening to. And then you just kind of start smoothing out your steps. And you can work from dark to light, or you can work from light to dark. Uh, Everyone's going to have a slightly different preference when they start to shade things. I know for me, it's easier to work from dark to light. I throw down my dark colors and then I work my light colors in slowly but surely. Some people work from midtones out, and you can do that too. Experiment with different shadings, see how well each different method works for you. We could throw a light one up here. We'll start. I was supposed to be going midtone to. As I said, I generally midtone out doesn't. I don't do that very often. So it's like, try and do something different to what I already know works for me. Yeah, Shell, with your with bad lighting, if you're working traditional, get like a little bed clamp light or something. I know my mom is an electrical supply. She works in electrical supplies, so she gets me specific light bulbs that are as close to sunlight as we can possibly get for my workspace because I cannot anymore stand working with yellow light. Um, but that's largely for working with color because I do work with a lot of color when I'm working traditional. And same thing there, your colors are going to reflect the color of your light, so it's not going to show up as accurate. And that is one of the downsides to traditional, but there's just some things that I much prefer doing in traditional, and I know a lot of other people much prefer doing certain things in traditional. It's finding which medium you like the best, and a lot of figuring out which tricks work between all of them. One of the other reasons we want to learn about manual gradation is uh, to learn how to keep our edges sharp. So it's kind of very hard to, if I start getting my gradation going, with my shading, start dipping out that black a little bit. But if I were to try to do that with, say, a soft brush, as soon as I try to stiffen up this edge, and you'll find this is a lot of the same thing for if you're using a smudge stick, you're going to lose a lot of your hard edges, and then it's very hard to get them back, even when I, as you can see, try to shrink. Which is fine if you want to lay down your lines 6 million times. I personally do not like doing line art. Or inking, I should say. I like doing line art, but I don't like inking. Uh, so retracing my lines over and over again, I don't like it. I will avoid it whenever possible. And we can use our drawing shapes that we were talking about earlier for shading. You can zigzag shade. That a little bit bigger. You can shade in cyclones. You can use straight lines to shade like I was doing up there. You can use hash marks. And hash marks are more of the layering variety. You can use stippling. So stippling's where you put down a million dots, and the closer your dots are together, the darker things look. And then as you start coming out, it's going to start looking lighter. In comics, we usually call those halftones, or those layers that have the dots together, and then you layer them together to make them look closer for shadows, and then look farther for. I'm not very good with stippling, as you can tell. It's definitely something I could use some practice on. And let's go back to our shapes matrix, and let's try. I'm just going to create a new layer. I'll put it underneath. We'll go back to our matrix, and we'll try a couple of these shadings from dark to light just to see which ones we like. And I'm just going to use a typical. This is the direction my light's coming in. I'll keep it the same on all of them. So I'm throwing down my darks first. And I'm kind of imagining I have a white dot and it's right there. So I'm kind of going out from that dot. I could actually do with lowering my flow a little bit more. And then I'm going to start throwing on another layer of dark. Then if you have an eraser, you can just kind of clean up your edges. Or if you work neatly at the edges, unlike me, I tend to work messy. And learning to work messy on practices is actually a kind of good habit to get into. Because then you're going to start teaching yourself speed and that you can do the same thing over and over and over again. And you're not messing it up, you're experimenting. And that one's, nobody likes to mess up their drawings. But if it's not perfect in the first place, you can experiment and find out what works with you. And let's do the cube from dark to light. I'm going to color my one face fairly dark. We'll make this one a little bit less dark. And even flat surfaces, if they're getting hit by light from high direction, it'll start lightening up as it gets to the edge of that direction. And then we'll throw a little bit of lighter color in here just for giggles. Say it's hitting somewhere along this front edge. Let's do a couple working from light to dark. Let's do the cylinder. Sure. I'm just going to put in my line of where my light is kind of hitting it. We'll say around there. Then I can kind of go through the entire thing. If you're using pencil, kind of quickly go through the entire thing after you figure out where your light point is. You can see I'm bringing in, need that to be darker. I'm bringing in those drawing shapes. I'm using that J curve. This is a round object, so it's kind of getting darker, and then the light's kind of pulling from the darker back edges, getting lighter as we go around, but it's also coming in from the top, so it's kind of cutting a circle. Go even darker. The one bonus about going from light to dark is you can start to see, oh hey, that's too light. I can start adding more dark, which works very good for traditional versus trying to erase stuff for traditional. That makes things a little bit more difficult. But as you can see, I'm starting to run out of space to put my darks, and I quite like this. So that's, for me, one of the downsides to working from light to dark. And we'll do this weird. Sure, we'll do this one. So I'm going to say this face is hitting that light probably straight on. It's a flat surface, so I can kind of get away with coloring in most of it as I go, most of the face. I'm going to start bringing that dark in this way. The light's there. Getting a little bit darker as it goes to the edges. Not too much though, just because this one's facing the light. Got this backside here. Light do we go? We went to that one. Okay. So go. And if it helps you to work on everything as a whole, you can do it that way, where you do in all of your mid-tone, then you start working in all of your darks, or you work on all of your lights. Or if it helps you easier to work on one little part at a time, do it that way too. There's no right or wrong answer to either of these. I know when I'm working on faces, portraits and stuff like that, I generally will work on one part of the face at a time. So uh, I'll fill in all of my kind of big shading, and then when I'm rendering it really fine, I'll go in and I'll do all of the nose, and then I'll do all of the eyes and connect that to the nose, and then I'll do all of the mouth and connect that to the nose. And then let's do... I've kind of been doing mid-tone out, I'm not going to lie, but we'll do. We'll do this flashlight guy. So yeah, experiment, find out mid-tone, mid-tone out works for you, find out if dark to light works for you, find out if light to dark works for you. And that will do this one too. So there's my light. Mid-tone would be somewhere in the middle here. Mid-tone out in grayscale on digital is a little bit difficult to kind of show you what. Sphere looked a little bit funny since I didn't have any highlight on it whatsoever compared to the other ones. And if you zoom really far out, you can see, hey, that looks like a sphere. That definitely starting to look like a cylinder. That looks like a cone. If your shading survives the zoom out test, you are doing fine even if you don't think you are doing fine. And I'm just going to go back to the can here. I'm throwing this layer on a multiply layer, which is going to kind of mimic pencils and traditional art a little bit more. But if I were thinking, hey, I'm on a time limit, doing the same thing with that. With our shading, just kind of working with our drawing shapes to kind of get the idea across of where my lighting is. That's not going to work if I'm on a multiply layer. I see what I did to myself. Entertaining. Okay, well, going to lose my lines a little bit. That's fine. And I should pull up my reference image again. So just looking at my reference image, I've got a circle of light here, a circle of light there, kind of comes down. Definitely got some hard lights going on up here. We'll go over this in the third class, but I see I've got some bounce lighting going on. And then I'm ignoring the reflections for a moment. But just finding the shapes that my shadows are kind of making. And the highlights are kind of making. And again, telling my brain, I don't care what you're thinking right now, that you think you know about lights. Hey, that go green. Oh man. Um, I'm just looking to my reference image and finding my shapes. Although I have done a lot of these various grayscale to uh, just painting them out using reference images. So by now my muscle memory is, it has a pretty good idea of what to expect. And everyone will get to that point at some point too. You just start going, oh, okay, yeah, that shape. I'm just going to throw that shape in there. Hey, that shape happens to look correct. So there is our kind of using our drawing shapes just to look at our reference image, go, hey, okay, that's those are the shapes I'm seeing, instead of, oh, well, I think the light should go here. On our way to retraining our brain to think like artists. And when you guys, if you guys go to work tomorrow, or not tomorrow, tomorrow's Saturday, we'll say Monday. If you go to work on Monday, look at something at complete random and see if you can figure out what shapes are in that one object. Start looking at, if you go out for a walk, um, look at the edges of your street. Look at a street sign. Start seeing if you can pick out what shapes are going on there. If you're just sitting people watching, start looking at things a little bit closer, and yeah, see if you can pick out what what shapes are going on that you wouldn't actually think of, or what shapes you'd use to draw that. Take pictures of things. Start building your own object reference library. And I'm going to go like this. Because this, I can take this to, I'm doing character design, I can do weapons with it, I can do limbs. And now I'm going to set you your homework. Because yay, homework. Everyone loves homework. Homework is always optional. I'm not going to request it. You don't ever have to actually submit homework. This is just if you want to work through some stuff. We might be using some of this in next week's, or you can start from scratch next week, whichever works for you. We're going to say take 3 objects. Break them down to their basic shapes. That would be like this guy here. We start breaking things down, not drawing it into too much detail. I'm going to say messiness is encouraged. Probably spelled that weird. I can't spell right now. Messiness is encouraged. Then we'll say shade 2 of them. So we're going to keep one as our messy sketch. Then we're going to do 2 as shaded objects. Again, messiness is encouraged. And if you have to, set a time limit. If it works better for you, do multiples. Each time you do it, it's just practice for the next one. Do we got any questions so far? That's about all I've got on my list of things to do, and I am still early. I need to start estimating my time better. No questions. And next week we're going to start getting into how to stack shapes, like for facial features and for torso features. We'll hit a little bit about maybe vehicles. Then we'll get into some more complex shading. We'll talk about ambient lighting and stuff like that. So if no questions, I will see you guys all next week. Have a good day.